I think we can start. It's already 11:05, so welcome everybody, and thank you for being here, for being with us today. So my name is Layshi Curbelo. I'm the host of this sketch session. This is our second sketch session. Super happy to have everyone here and share a little bit more about us. So welcome to everybody. Sketch session is basically a space when we will share some of the insights of the industry, some of the insights of actually the product by itself about Sketch. Today with us is Joseph Todaro. Welcome, Joseph. How are you, Mr. Joseph?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. I'm just chuckling at the chat. Jason's admiring the microphone. Apparently, it's a topic of discussion on Twitter.
I can imagine, and I cannot compete with that. I love your microphone. It's better than I have over here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yours sounds great.
Thank you so much. Just to give you a little bit about context, again, my name is Layshi Curbelo. I'm a UX designer with a specialized on accessibility. And today I'm here with Joseph. Joseph is our also design advocate here at Sketch. Joseph, do you want to talk about a little bit more about you, about what you do here?
A little bit of context about me. Like Layshi said, I'm a design advocate here at Sketch, but our roles are subtly different. Layshi is very much entrenched in the events world. And I work on, as I'm sure some of you may be familiar, a lot of design tutorials and recorded video content, teaching folks how to use Sketch, what Sketch is all about. So that's the bulk of what I do here. But I'm excited to have this opportunity to join Layshi live for one of these events and kind of join forces.
Thank you so much. So today we will have in our agenda to basically we will be a dive in of the product, some of the product updates that we have for you guys. We will be covering some of the new insights and all the things that I know that everybody's excited about it. But without further ado, I will let Mr. Joseph to share basically the space and enlighten us with all the information that we have for our audience.
I'm going to share my display and we'll get right into the good stuff. I've got at least 3 hours worth of stuff that I could talk about, and I'm going to try to condense that down into about 45 minutes. So I'll likely be moving fast here, but let's start with just to kind of contextualize the presentation. I've got some stuff to show you in the Mac app, which is the Sketch Mac app that we all know and love. Some stuff to show you in the web app, which has been around for a little bit, but continues to grow in its offering. And it's definitely a different beast now than it was months ago. And our brand new iOS app, which is all new, completely rebuilt from the ground up. You may be familiar with Sketch Mirror. This is essentially Sketch Mirror plus access to your entire workspace via your iPhone. So a lot of the functionality of the web app, but sort of in the palm of your hand, which untethers you from the wire that was once connected to your computer, where we use Sketch Mirror. So we'll start with the Mac app because there is plenty of cool stuff, a lot of little quality of life improvements that have been made. I'm going to dismiss the workspaces window here that's showing all the documents that are on my workspace, and we'll just start with a blank document here. Because some of you may have noticed that when you go to insert an artboard these days, that we have sort of this more visually embellished view of what appears to be artboard presets at a glance. But these aren't the artboard presets that we're used to. These are a whole new bit of functionality that we call artboard templates. And artboard templates in their default form here might just be blank artboards, right? If I drag and drop one of them, it looks like the old school artboard templates, but or I should say artboard presets. But with these templates, we can create our own, and an artboard template isn't just an artboard size like the presets were. An artboard template can contain any and all the layers and or symbols that we want it to. So let's say, for example, when we kick off a project, let's say we typically start by adding a layer with a mask for the rounded corners and the notch on a newer iPhone. And then we add the status bar. Let's say, depending on light theme or dark theme, we might start with one of two versions. We put the little home indicator at the bottom, and that's how we start most of our projects, right? A little tedious to have to do that every time. So now with an artboard selected, or even with both of these selected, on the inspector on the right-hand side, you can see there's a new option to enable this as a template. And in doing so, I've just added both of these artboards as sort of a starting point when I go back to insert an artboard. So now when I go to the topmost drop down, I can choose to browse the templates that are in the current document. And there they are. And I can just drop in and start with one of these. And you might be thinking, okay, we kind of use symbols this way now. But in using a symbol this way, you have to detach it. You have to make sure that you detach the appropriate number of levels deep so that you have, the edit control over the things that you want to be detached and that you don't accidentally detach something that's meant to remain a symbol. So this just allows you to just, quick and dirty, get the artboard in there and get moving with all the templatized elements that you need. And just to give you a little bit of inspiration, if we come down here to artboard template inspiration, you can see that there are just a few things that we've created for you just to get your wheels turning about what's possible with these artboard templates. Social templates, the iOS home screen template where the icons are already populated and you can add your own icon. A lot of possibilities, not all of which are entirely appropriate use cases for symbols. So we've created a new tool for a new set of use cases. So with this, any templates that I create within a document, if I choose to make this document a library, if I add it as a library, I have unsaved changes, I'll save those. And now I've got this document as a library, which I will enable. If I go over to a new blank document, or if a member of my team who's sharing libraries with me goes to a new blank document, that document will now show as a source of artboard templates. So that's where it really becomes powerful, when you start to share these in the form of libraries, right? to confine these within a single document would be a shame. So use them liberally with libraries for the best experience. And when it comes to libraries, we've also added a little quality of life improvement. You may know that in the past, if there was a library update, you had to download the library update. Then you would have to go to any document that had components from that library. You'd have to update the components in that document. So now we've eliminated a step for those who don't want that extra step. If we go to the libraries and the preferences, we now have automatically download and update libraries. So if you choose to check that box, if there's a library update, we'll download it automatically. You'll get a notification if and when there's a symbol from that library that's also, there's an instance in the document you're currently looking at. So you can still selectively pull in those changes where those changes affect your documents. But you don't have to deal with the extra step of, oh, I forgot to download and update the library. Oh, I'm at a coffee shop with a slow internet connection. I've got to wait for this to download. So this way you'll always be up to date. It's a very nice little thing to not have to worry about anymore. So
definitely.
Yeah.
I just want to chime in just to give you a little bit of context. People are following today. Take advantage that Mr. Joseph are using some of the different shortcuts, and you can see it below on the screen. So if you want to actually use the same hack, you can do it and just check it out below. Joseph, you can continue.
Thank you. Command 1 and Command 2, you're probably going to see a lot. Command 1 to show everything that's on the canvas fit into the canvas view. And Command 2 to zoom into the selected element. Those are two of my favorites. You'll see them a lot. Cool. I'm actually going to get rid of this artboard template. I'm going to go with the light template here. And I'm going to show that when I create a rectangle nowadays, we have these new corner controls, which is something I've been wanting for such a long time. And I'm so happy to see that they're here. We've always had the ability to edit the corner radius on the inspector, but now we get these little handles that appear when we hover our cursor over a rectangle. And with that, there are a couple of tricks up its sleeve. For example, if you hold the Command key, you can adjust one corner at a time. And two, because our designers and our engineers are very detail oriented and leave no stone unturned. If there are corners that match one another's radius, they continue to match one another's radius. So you don't have to worry about either editing all four together or breaking them all apart and having to deal with them individually. If they match, they work together. So just to prove that to you, I'm actually going to make this one different, right? These two still work together. And let's say I leave them at 40 and I make this one 40. let's say I make both of these 40, you'll see that once the value matches, it identifies the match and they continue to sync with one another. So there's really no additional work required on your part, unless and until you want to make an exception, in which case, again, hold the command key and drag, and you're good to go. But again, you can do all this on the inspector. You don't have to worry about doing it directly on the canvas if you want to be a bit more precise or use math operators, for example. And there's a quick little toggle to go between showing all the corner radii with one control versus breaking them apart into all four corners. And we now have the ability not only to do rounded corners, which were the typical old school corner radius, smooth corners, which is Apple's way of sort of reducing that hard tangent between the straight segment and the rounded corner itself. It's a little extra smooth. We now have angled, inside square, and inside arc. So a few more different corner styles to work with. So before I spend too much time on these corner controls, I'm going to move on to another feature that I really, really like. And it's for positioning things while we're talking about the inspector and all these numbers over here. So let's say this was 200 by 150. But I wanted it to be at the bottom of the artboard, but not just at the bottom of the artboard, at the bottom of the artboard plus, let's say, 37 pixels from the bottom to leave a little room for the home indicator, right? In the past, I could bottom align this and then nudge it up, or bottom align it and then use a math operator to modify the value. But now, finally, we can actually type T or B for top or bottom, L or R for left or right, or C or M for center or middle when we type a value into the inspector. So for the Y position, which is the vertical axis, I could type 37, and this is another new feature here. I see an orange box on the canvas that's showing me a preview of where this box is going to end up before I commit, which is really nice if you're doing complex math operations, because it can be a little annoying to retype those, right? So now I can see that orange box is going to go to the top. That's not what I want. I'm instead going to append the letter B for bottom to the end of this number. And I can see with that orange frame, which we call foresight, that it is going to go to the bottom. It's going to be 37 pixels from the bottom, which means we're respecting the bottom edge as the coordinate system, the bottom edge of the object and the bottom edge of the parent artboard. So there's some pretty smart math going on here, making this possible. And once you get used to it, it's hard to live without. It is definitely one of those things. So let's see what else I have time to talk about before we transition over to prototyping. Some of you may... Yeah, Layshi, go ahead.
No, it's also good to add that actually you can do some math formulas also there for the people that are really pixel perfect. You can actually take advantage of that also.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we support addition, subtraction, multiplication. We even recognize the word pi as representing 3.14 blah, 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 blah. You can type.
That's a good one. I didn't know that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. A lot of people don't know that one. I think we also support exponents using the little caret symbol that's above the number 6 on the keyboard, and even percentages. So if I wanted this width, for example, to be the same width as the artboard, I could type 100% and it grabs the width of the parent artboard. And then I could just set my X position to 0 and boom, I've got a full width rectangle without ever having to drag anything, which is super nice. And then if I want the height of this to be, let's say, half of the width, you can also use W in place of typing the actual width. And then I can do divided by 2. So that's the width divided by 2, which gives us 195, which might be the number that we're going for. It might not be, but at least we didn't have to do the math ourselves.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Tricks. You can continue.
I love the tricks. Speaking of which, some of you who follow me on Twitter might know that I have sort of an obsession for 3D modeling, and that I've got a little side project where I have a bunch of 3D raster images. They're PNGs that you can drag and drop into Sketch. It's called ShapeFest. And I've got some shapes that have some tricks up their sleeve. So we've made some improvements that were actually inspired by ShapeFest. I actually came complaining to the engineers because I wanted a certain pack from ShapeFest to work in a more seamless way. And that is the frosted glass shape. So if I drag and drop one of these frosted glass shapes, you can see it's too large because I didn't drag it into the artboard. A little trick: if you drag and drop a shape into an artboard, it will size it to fit the artboard. But there's more. That's not new, but part of this is new. The first part is you can see that this is a transparent PNG image. There's a bunch of transparent pixels around this. And then within the shape itself, this is a frosted glass raster graphic. But frosted glass implies that what's behind it becomes blurred. So in the past, I would have to draw, using the vector tool, I would have to draw an outline around this shape and use background blur to achieve the blur behind the frosted glass, which was a bit tedious. And that's what I came complaining about. And they added, I like to think they added it for me, that you can now, for the very first time, apply background blur to a raster graphic. That was not possible before. So if a pixel is transparent, it's ignored. If a pixel has any opacity to it whatsoever, any alpha value, it will get blurred. So because the inside of the shape has some alpha, it's blurred. Because the outside of the shape is completely transparent, it's left alone. So we end up with this awesome frosted glass effect. So let's say I go so far as to even add a fill. Fills now respect alpha, and I'll turn the opacity of this down quite a bit. So it's just slightly tinted red, as if the red is sort of bouncing around inside the frosted glass. And then I say, you know what? I wish I used a different image from the beginning. Now, new in Sketch, if you drag and drop one image on top of another, it will swap it. And not only will it swap it, but it keeps all of the changes that you've made on the inspector. It kept my background blur, it kept my fills, and if I made any color adjustments, it would keep those as well. So I'm really thrilled with that one because I'm constantly testing out different images to see what works. And now I don't have to resize them. It's going to come in at the same size, and I don't have to reset my styling on the inspector or even create a shared style if I'm not ready to yet. So, like I said, I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours. Before I get in too deep on these small quality of life improvements, I do want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about prototyping, because prototyping has been a bit of, what's the term, an elephant in the room for a while. It's an aspect of Sketch that has remained largely the same for quite some time. And there has been a good reason for that. In fact, I joined the Sketch team about 9 months ago, and one of the first times I raised my hand, I was like, hey, what's going on with prototyping? Will there be improvements? And it turns out
there are some questions on the chat about that. Actually, people are just like, please, some updates on prototyping.
help us. Yeah, so we have good news about prototyping. We have new features that are ready to go now. And just to explain why they took so long, we completely rebuilt our prototyping engine. Our prototyping engine and our preview window and our mirror app and our web app, all of the above, once upon a time only showed flat images, right? You were essentially navigating a slideshow of flat images, which severely limits our ability to sort of compose things on the fly. And a good example of that would be an overlay, where you're taking a screen and you are composing an overlay on top of that screen, and the end result is something that didn't previously exist in your document. You could have screen A and overlay B. You could have screen C and overlay A. You end up with a lot of mixing and matching. So we've rebuilt our prototyping engine to allow for things to be layered upon one another and to actually render this sort of dynamic layered view instead of flat images on the Mac app, the web app, and the iOS app. And our prototyping engine and our canvas rendering engine is built into the iPhone app. You're not even looking at flat images on the iPhone app, which I'll talk about here momentarily. I'll show you. I'll prove it. So let's talk prototyping. We know we've got a renewed prototyping engine, which sets the stage for us to start investing in some new prototyping features. And with that, we've promoted prototyping to its own tab on the inspector, which is really nice because when you navigate to the prototyping tab, not only do you eliminate the noise of all the non-prototyping stuff on the inspector, but you also enable the connection lines on the canvas. So it's a quick way to enable or disable sort of the distractions or tools associated with what it is that you're trying to accomplish. with this, there's some new stuff, some new quality of life improvements that I'll talk about first. Then we'll get into overlays. And the first thing was something that bothered me for quite a while. I feel comfortable saying that. I inject my personal opinion along the way, which disclaimer is not necessarily the opinion of Sketch. If I open up this symbol source, you can see that there is a prototype link that's going from this layer. There's no hotspot. It's going directly from this layer, and it links to sort of the home screen of the app. So sort of a common pattern on the web. If you click on the logo, it takes you to the home screen, right? So let's say we said, we're going to put that link on the symbol. So anywhere we use the logo, you'll be able to click and navigate to the home screen. We won't have to worry about linking it up every time. Well, in the past, if that link was in a symbol, and that symbol was used all over the place, we couldn't override the link. So if there was an exception along the way, let's say, for example, these onboarding screens, we don't want this to link to the home screen because we want people to navigate through the onboarding flow, we wouldn't be able to remove this link, right? We would have to go back and we would have to use hotspots instead. Hotspots could be overridden. Links on layers could not be overridden. We fixed it. You can now override links, whether they're on layers or hotspots. If I go to the design tab, this is one exception to prototyping stuff showing up in the design tab, because this is currently where all overrides appear. I could say, I don't want that prototype link and set that to none. So I'm overriding a link that's on a layer, not on a hotspot. And that is new. That was not possible before. So that's definitely a welcome improvement. Another little quality of life improvement, if you do have a linear flow like this onboarding flow, or if you have a presentation, for example, where you go from the first screen to the second screen to the third screen, etc., you may link a button. You may link the entire artboard, which is another new quality of life improvement. You couldn't previously link an entire artboard as a target, like a touch target. Now you can. But in this case, for this example, I have the next button linked to the next artboard. In the past, I would link this button to this specific artboard, this button to this specific artboard, and then if I decided later to rearrange them, I would have to redo those links. So another small improvement that I honestly didn't know if I was even going to use, but now I can't live without, is the new target option to link, auto link, not just link, but auto link to the right artboard, the artboard that's the next one to the right. And this also respects the reading direction that you have set in the preferences. So if you normally flow things right to left instead of left to right, if you set right to left in the preferences, this will switch to auto link to left artboard. So little detail for those of you who design for right to left. Anywho, because I'm auto linking to right artboard, if I grab all of these and use our little smart distribute handles to rearrange, whoops, you'll notice that the links reestablish themselves to the artboard to the right, which is really nice. Saves a lot of time if you're doing a presentation or an onboarding flow. I am a big fan. Cool. That covers the changes with how links work. Depending on how up to date you are, you can also now drag and drop the prototype links themselves. That's a relatively new thing. You used to have to go into the settings to mess with those on the inspector, but now you can just drag to point them elsewhere or drag them away, and they poof in the Mac OS poof that we all know and love. Cool. So overlays. I know I'm speeding through this stuff, but there will be a recording and more video content to come. Overlays are a feature that we've needed them for quite some time to prevent us from having to create the same artboard over and over and over again, showing the overlay, not showing the overlay, showing the overlay with perhaps something augmented on top of it, showing without that little thing augmented on top of it. And now that we have overlays, we can avoid a tremendous amount of rework and creating additional permutations of screens just by linking to an artboard as an overlay. So first thing, an artboard is now either a screen or an overlay from a prototyping perspective. An artboard either represents something that is scaled to fit this device size and is going to behave as a screen that we can link to, or it's meant to be an overlay that lays on top of a screen, in which case It could be any size. It doesn't need to be the same size as the device itself. When we switch to overlay mode, we get this new little icon next to the artboard name, and we can set all of our overlay settings for the overlay itself, which might not seem significant, but if you end up using the same overlay in a bunch of different places within your design, it's nice being able to set it once centrally and have those settings apply to each and every usage, each and every implementation of that same overlay. So we could say, yes, this overlay is going to align to the screen. It's sort of like a full screen overlay. It's not going to be relative to the object that triggers the overlay, which is what layer does. So I'm going to leave it on screen. I'm going to say I want this to be aligned to the top of the screen, but not just aligned to the very top of the screen. I want a little bit of an offset. So I'm going to add an extra 40 pixels of padding here. And you might be thinking, you can't see what you're doing, right? You can't see what it's going to look like. When you establish the settings of an overlay on the overlay itself, there's no place to see what it's going to look like because we haven't decided on an interaction that's going to make it show up on a screen yet. So let's say, for example, you know what? I don't like this. I'm a visual person. I got to do this visually. You could instead establish the overlay settings from an interaction, a specific interaction. So if this magnifying glass is going to trigger the search modal, makes sense, I'll press the letter W on the keyboard to create a new connection line, a little shortcut for you. And I will link to this search modal, in which case you see it appear because now we're linking from a particular screen. So now we can see it, we can preview it on that particular screen. At this point, any changes I make over here on the inspector, I get visual feedback. I get to see what they look like, or I can click and drag directly on the canvas. And I say, you know what? That is plenty of space there. And it ends up being 38. But now I'm making these changes on this specific interaction, which means anywhere else I'm using this overlay, these settings aren't necessarily going to apply. So we thought of that. We added a button for that. There's a little button here. If you make changes to a particular interaction with an overlay and you want that to apply to the overlay itself so that every other thing that links to this overlay matches, you can push your settings up to the overlay itself. So now if I go to the overlay itself, we can see that that number 38 has updated here. So any changes you make on the interaction level, you can push up to the overlay level. Any changes you make on the overlay level will automatically get pulled down to the interaction level unless you override them, which makes sense. It's a pretty logical inheritance model. Let's say we want the keyboard to show up when you tap on the search bar here. Now we're talking about an overlay on top of an overlay. And we support that. We fully support that. So over here, the keyboard isn't even an artboard. I mentioned before that an overlay would be an artboard that's set to overlay mode. And in this case, this isn't even an artboard, but we've got your back there. If you link to an object that isn't an artboard, which previously wasn't even possible, we'll assume you're trying to link it as an overlay, right? Because if it was a screen, it would be an artboard already. So in this case, because it's not a screen, we automatically wrap it in an artboard, we set it to overlay mode, and you're good to go. You just need to tweak your settings here. So because it's a keyboard, it probably belongs at the bottom of the screen. I can even say I want it to transition with a little slide up animation. And now we've got a nice little stack here. We just have to decide, what's going to happen with the interactions of these overlapping overlays. That's where things can get a little bit interesting. So a few things that we've got to quote unquote worry about. If I go over to the actual overlay settings for the overlay itself, we could determine whether or not interaction is allowed to happen behind the overlay. Because normally an overlay goes on top and it's sort of like a sheet of glass that's over the entire design. That's blocking interactions below. So I could say, you know what? If we click outside the keyboard, let's dismiss the keyboard. Let's close the overlay. That keeps it nice and simple. And then for this one here, rather than tapping outside the search modal, or let's say, you know what, if you want, you can tap outside the search modal and we'll close it. That makes a certain amount of sense. But we also want the close button to close it, right? We got a little close icon here. Because this close button knows that it's on an artboard that's being used as an overlay, we have the option of linking to close overlay. it's self-aware. If it's not an overlay, you can't link to close overlay. If it is, you can. So I'll link that to close overlay. So now we've got a search button that calls this up as an overlay. We've got a search bar that calls this up as an overlay. And if we tap away from the keyboard, it'll go away. If we tap close, this will go away. Let's test it. Let's see if Joseph's lying about all this. I'm going to click on preview. I will click the little search icon. It appears instantly because that is the transition type that was chosen. And then when I click on the close button, it closes. Well, let's test out that keyboard and overlay on top of an overlay. There we go. Keyboard pops up and it did a little transition. I don't know if the frame rate allowed that to come through on Zoom. But again, if I tap away from it, it'll transition away. It reverses that same animation, which is nice. And then I can click on this to close. So there we have it, an overlay on top of an overlay. And anywhere that I decide to use those overlays, those settings are going to carry over because they're all pushed up to the overlay itself. Okay, one last thing, and this is sort of a piece of inspiration because I'm going to have to go through it so fast before we move on to the iPhone app. I've got another example here because I know that we've all been sort of clamoring for the ability to swap something out on like a button level. Like we want to click on a button and have it change without having to create a whole new artboard. So here's sort of a creative implementation of overlays. I've got these two icons here. They can be toggled. This can be marked as a favorite or this can be bookmarked. If I go into the symbol sources themselves, you can see I've got the off variant of this. I've got the on variant of this. If I want to link them together, so to speak, on the symbol level, I can accomplish this using overlays. It's, I suppose, an untraditional usage for overlays, but I'm going to do it anyways. So if I link this over to here, normally I would be linking one screen to another. You know, the normal prototyping usage of this makes absolutely no sense. But if I make both of these overlays, the rules change a little bit. And now not only will I link to this, I'll make sure that it's going to align relative to the layer that triggered it, right? It's important that this doesn't just appear in the middle of the artboard as an overlay. I want it to appear on top of the button, the original button that triggered it, because they're the same size. They'll align nicely. And I want them to be centered on one another. I have this little widget here where I can choose how they're aligned, but I want the center of the overlay to be centered on the layer that triggered the overlay. So center, that's how I have that set. I'm going to do the same for this one down here. Link this over here, make sure we're aligned relative to layer, center, looking good. And then I also want to link the on state to close the overlay. So when I click on the off state, it's going to trigger the overlay. When I click on the on state, it's going to close the overlay. So now I've accomplished linking the icon to an overlay of the on state that's just going to get slapped on top of it. So this is not equivalent to states in the sense of what we're all hoping for the future, and you know, stay tuned. But it is a great little hacky workaround for those situations where layering one on top of the other doesn't cause any weird visual artifacts. Only one of them has a shadow, so we don't have to worry about anything weird happening. So let's go back to this example here. We got some crazy prototyping lines, but we'll just ignore those because if I preview this and I click on the heart, there we go. Heart appears. When I click on this, little bookmark icon appears, and I've essentially accomplished off, on, off, on, off, on, without having to create 4 separate artboards, which is a really big deal because creating 4 separate artboards is super annoying. And that gives us a lot of design debt that we have to maintain. Now, one little mistake that I did make was when this transition or animation is triggered, it's doing a little slide up. So I'd probably want these to be instant to avoid that weird little animation happening. But yeah, that is the idea. Now, when I preview this, boom, boom, instant, and I didn't have to create any additional artboards. And because this was set up at the symbol level, if I slap this in somewhere else, the little heart icon, that interaction is going to come with it. It's part of the symbol now. So it saves a tremendous amount of work down the road. Anywho, that is a quick demo of overlays. They are fantastic. They're definitely a game changer when it comes to prototyping. But since I'm pressed for time, I'm going to move on to the iOS app, which is going to allow us to see those overlays in all their glory in the palm of our hand. So I've got my iPhone connected here. I'm going to open the new Sketch app, which you can download from the App Store. I believe the exact name of it, in case you have trouble searching for it, is Sketch View and, oh dear, Layshi, do you remember the exact name of it? I know if you type Sketch and then the letter V, it comes right up. That's what I do. Sketch and the space V.
I do the same. I just put a Sketch and that goes directly to me.
Perfect. Yeah, if you do a search for just the word Sketch, you may find the old Sketch Mirror. You may find apps that are about sketching with your hand. So help us get ranked better in the searches by going and downloading the app and giving it a rating. So here we have the workspace that I was last looking at. In fact, it'll show any and all workspaces that I'm a member of, so I can hop in between. If I'm a guest on a workspace and I just have view permissions to a single document, it'll still show up here. I can still jump into it. So I'll go to Monday Design, which I know we've got some sample documents in here. Down below, we can see all of the projects that are in this workspace. We can see that some of them are private. There's a little lock icon next to the private ones, which is a relatively new feature. I'll talk about that more in a moment here. And you can see all of your documents. You can browse all of your documents and open them in the app. Something else that's special is happening on the screen here. In this top section, it says from your Mac, which is where we get back the old mirror functionality that we used to have, except this is going to mirror via the workspace. So essentially, in the same way that live collaboration works, when a change is made in the desktop app, that change is reflected for other users who are using the desktop app. That same system is being used here, so that as you make changes in the desktop app, those changes are reflected in the mobile app, in the web app, in other users' desktop app. So we're all centrally pulling down the latest changes from the workspace itself. So if I open up this from your Mac document, normally I'm just browsing around doing my thing like I normally would without my computer present. But there is an additional little button in the top right corner. And the reason that is there is because I have that same document open in the Mac app. That's allowing me to mirror the iPhone app that's in my hand with the document that's open in the Mac app on my computer. So I am going to tap on that icon. And now, rather than just showing whatever screen I choose to navigate to, it's going to show whichever artboard I have selected. So there's my sweet Sketch Mirror functionality happening over the web and happening quite quickly. I mean, my internet's decent, but this is still very nice and snappy and responsive, even though it's happening over the web. So another thing I didn't mention in the prototyping section, there's this little flag icon at the top of this particular artboard. When you're prototyping, this little flag represents the start point of a prototype, and the start point of a prototype makes it show up as a prototype when you're browsing on the web or when you're browsing in the iPhone app. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I open up this travel app, let's say we're not mirroring, we're not using the Mac app. I'm going to minimize this to get rid of the distraction. If I go down here to prototypes, you can see there's a prototype called Home. That prototype called Home is because the home artboard is marked as a start point, a prototyping start point. So if I wanted to change the name of the prototype, I would just change the name of the artboard here. And if I wanted an additional prototype that, let's say, started from the My Trips screen, I could select it. And from the prototype screen, I could say set as prototype start point. Now, by doing that, if I come back to the web app, the next time I open up this travel app document and go down, you can see I now have two quote unquote prototypes. I have the home prototype because that's a start point, and the My Trips prototype because that's a start point. So start points are actually pretty important in the Mac app because they will determine what shows up as a prototype for any viewers that you share the document with, whether they're viewing on the web or viewing with the iPhone app on their device. And it's nice because you could have one large contiguous prototyping flow, but mark several start points to be able to jump into specific parts of the experience without having to say, oh, wait, I got to go back 5 screens. I got to go forward 8 screens. I can't find that one screen that I'm looking for. So start points can be a bit of a lifesaver. So the iPhone app, you're able to view all the documents on your workspace that you have permission to. You're able to view and navigate prototypes, overlays work, all that good stuff. And I mentioned that I would prove to you that we are rendering on the fly. If I zoom in, and you can zoom in a lot, on something that's vector, you can see that it is redrawing. It is re-rendering these vector objects on the fly. This is not a flat image. It's not a super, super high resolution flat image. It is vector, and it's rendering on the fly, which also allows us to render things like prototypes and overlays on the fly as well. All right. Next up, we have the web app, and a few things are new in the web app. You can see here I have a little sample document created by another one of our sort of advocate slash evangelists, Tiago. You probably see him on social media a lot. He's very, very active on Twitter and on other social media platforms where we have a presence. He answers questions on Reddit, which is really nice. Tiago's been creating these tutorial template files for us so we can play with stuff and learn by doing. And with that, if he shares a workspace document, even though we only have view permissions to these workspace documents, we've got a brand new feature called duplicate to my drafts. So if somebody shares a document, if you were to, let's say, share a UI kit or an asset or a resource, this is the future of sharing assets via Sketch. Right now, a lot of us are downloading local files and then uploading those local files to our workspace. Now we can instantly get a copy in our My Drafts folder and fork it off so that way we can do anything we want with it without affecting the original. And the same goes for documents. Let's say you're part of a design team and you want to do a little experimentation on something, but you don't want to affect the original document. Maybe you don't even want the creator to know that you're messing with their idea and putting together alternative solutions. You can duplicate someone else's document to My Drafts directly from the workspace window in the Mac app, which is a fresh new thing. So I'm going to go over to my workspace where I've got a few different documents going on and show you a couple of new things that happen when you jump into a document. So I'll go into the prototyping demo document that I had open earlier where I was showing you all overlays. And when I jump into a document now, you may have noticed I'm looking at the sketch canvas. This is something that's rolling out this week. Before, we had a canvas view that was optional. It was in beta. We were testing it, making sure we had cross-browser compatibility nicely locked down, performance, reliability, etc. Now, or coming soon, coming this week, when you open the pages of a sketch document, it's going to bring you directly into the canvas view. So you're going to see everything that you see in the Mac app in its full fidelity. You'll see not only the artboards, but a layer that's not necessarily an artboard that's floating on the canvas. Any layers, any notes, anything that's floating around on the canvas will show because we see the entire canvas now. We don't see images that are sort of clipped out and exported from the artboards themselves. So with this, it kind of immediately begs the question, what about commenting? Because in the past, we've commented on specific artboards, but now we might want to comment on something that's not necessarily on an artboard. We might want to comment on something that is on an artboard and then also comment on something that's floating next to the artboard. So as usual, you can comment on artboards themselves. And now, or I should say coming soon, coming early August, in the next couple of weeks, commenting will improve drastically to allow for you to add what we call an annotation. And an annotation is just a point on the canvas or on an artboard where a comment can be left. So some of us in the past have been InVision users. We're used to commenting directly on a specific point on an artboard. It allows us to not explain what we're talking about, but just to point to it, which is a must, an absolute must for us visual people. And we can now do that using annotations. So if hidden treasures, the text here looks a little bit diminished in opacity, I can click on the add comment icon, add an annotation, and I can say, can we increase the opacity of the text here? My favorite part is typing the word here, because here is already implied by where I clicked to add the comment. I don't have to explain on the hidden treasures book that's in the top section under new books with the other books next to it. None of that. I click on it, I leave an annotation. Now, anyone who comes here browsing might go to the comment sidebar and they might see, can we increase the opacity of the text here? What is Joseph talking about? If they click on the comment, it's going to show them exactly what I'm talking about. So the comment sidebar went from being our primary mechanism for having conversations to now being a summary when the annotations feature rolls out. So if you were to open your workspace right now, it would still be the old way. The new way is going to be enabled automatically in the coming weeks, which is going to bring the annotations button to the side or to the toolbar at the top, and it's going to remove. You'll notice there's no longer an add comment field at the bottom here, because our comments now and our threads, our conversations, our replies, they all happen within the context of these little annotations, which I can also move around, which is really, really nice. So this is a big deal. This is something that is majorly going to improve the way conversations take place and happen organically within the web app. And you'll also be able to mention folks. You can use Markdown within these comments. You can also add emojis. So they're a bit more rich than just plain text. And if you do mention someone, they're going to be able to see the mentions in the updates section of the web app, and clicking, naturally, you'd probably expect this, clicking on a comment in your updates is going to bring you directly to that artboard. It's going to open the annotation. You'll see the dot, you'll see the comment, and you can reply directly from the context of the comment itself. And then you say, okay, this needs action, and you've got your edit in Sketch button right here. It'll launch it in the desktop app, and you're off and running. So there's never been less friction between collecting feedback, discussing designs, and being able to actually make those actionable and fix them. Really, really great new stuff. The last thing I want to talk about with the 8 seconds that I have left is a new addition that may have slipped through the cracks. It's called design tokens or color tokens. Some of you may be familiar with color tokens. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of design tokens. Some of you may not be, but are familiar with being able to save colors in Sketch as color variables. Now, being able to save colors as color variables within the Mac app has sort of a superpower when it comes to developer handoff. And it's that you've already established a name for a color and a hex code for a color in the desktop app. Why not hand that off to a developer as sort of a dictionary of colors, which is essentially exactly what color tokens are. They're a pair of a name and a value, right? That's a token. So for those of you who aren't familiar with tokens, there you go. Name, value, that's a token. So when it comes to colors, we have the name of the color, we have the hex code of the color, and we might want to just pass all of those off to a developer. So in the web app, if we go into the color variables for a document, we can see them all. We can click on them and we can see one at a time, what the hex code is. We can go and copy that value. But now, relatively new, we can also go to the bottom left-hand corner and choose Export Color Tokens. And Sketch will automatically turn all of the color variables into quote-unquote design tokens, which a developer can go and pop directly into CSS code. They can pop directly into any coding language that they're using by taking these values and translating them. So this is kind of developer territory, and I don't want to scare anyone. But just as an example, let's say an amateur developer that we'll say his name is also Joseph made an example for this presentation. And over here, we've got a web page that's being developed locally. The colors are blue because the old design was blue. And the engineer, Joseph number 2, designed this using the original color tokens that were passed off through the web app. So what that allows for is now when we update the design in Sketch and we say, hey, we're going with brown now. We're doing the the logistics thing. We want more of a cardboard vibe because we're a logistics company. We say, okay, here's the design, or maybe the developer opens up the same link that we gave them before and they see, that there's brown here now. And perhaps in the version history, we added a description, because we can do that now. We can actually add a description. We could say color palette. I always spell palette wrong. Good Lord. There we go. It always takes me like 4 tries to spell palette. Color palette changed from blue to brown tones. And we'll choose save description. So now the engineer can see this wasn't an accident, that we actually have a milestone in this document where there's been a deliberate design change where we changed from blue to brown tones. So if they say, okay, we'll implement that in our little preview here, they could say, I grabbed the CSS last time, so I'll grab the CSS again. And when I copy and paste this over the old tokens, hit save and refresh. Here we go. In live code, this is an actual HTML and CSS web page. In live code, the colors have updated. If I say, you know what, forget it, I'm going to roll back, hit undo, save it, refresh, boom, old colors are back. So color tokens really do increase the agility of having a developer update the colors within code using our sketch document as a source of truth, not having to write that sort of dictionary of colors from scratch, which of course adds additional friction. So I'm up on time. I'm over on time. I just want to say that recently we have created and launched an intro to Sketch course for those of you who are new to all this or want to brush up on what's new in Sketch. It's called Sketch 101. You'll find that on the Discover page, which you'll actually find directly within your workspace and within the Mac app. And from the Discover page, this is where we keep you up to date with what's new. You might recognize this guy. That is the Sketch 101 course if we click on this. And this is also where you'll find updates on events that are coming soon, which is where I'll turn it over to Layshi to discover events past, present, and future.
That's correct. As Mr. Joseph mentioned, we will have Discover available for everyone that wants to actually find some information about guides, about some of the educational content, but also some of the events that we will be actually showcase the best of the industry and some of this actual product updates. Thank you so much for everybody to be here. We have some questions on the line. We are actually answering some of the questions on the chat, but also we are available through our social media channels. We will be answering all your questions, and please send us to our social media channels because we love to be on Twitter and we can actually be more funny on Twitter. So I will be sharing over here my handles, Joseph handles, and also Tiago handles. Tiago is the man behind of our templates or the different things in terms of tutorials. And Mr. Jose and I are the faces in terms of events. No, I'm just kidding. So any questions, please let us know. And thank you so much for being here, for basically just sharing with us this time and just learning about Sketch. Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Any further words?
No, in fact, since you all have had a chance to sort of peek at the chat and the Q&A, if there are any questions that are top of mind that you want to run by me while I'm still sharing my screen, anything that would benefit from being able to show and not just tell, throw them at me. I'm happy to answer whatever questions we have time for live.
Really quick, we have one related to actually tokens. Are the color tokens values always RGB, or can they be set to be HSL or something else? That was a question for Jason.
That's a great question. Let me go back to the color tokens we were just looking at. One of the great things about color tokens, and the reason you see here Amazon style dictionary, is standards are still sort of emerging. We haven't all decided what a color token should be formatted like. In fact, there are a lot of different opinions, some of which are great, but aren't the same. So where most of us have landed on color tokens is sort of this tool agnostic or code agnostic version of tokens, which is exactly what these JSON Amazon style dictionary tokens are. They're RGBA values, but they're meant to be run through a tool that's part of style dictionary that will translate these into whatever format you want. That's developer territory. I've never actually used that tool, but the idea is that these JSON tokens would be an input for a tool that translates them into whatever you want. So you end up saying, you know what, I do need these in CSS with hex values, but I also need these for iOS. And that tool will pump out both directly from this JSON file as an input. I hope that's a good answer. There are so many different ways that these could be exported. And rather than us trying to figure out all of them, we're just sort of giving you that code agnostic JSON version that can be pumped through whatever translator your dev team decides to use. I hope that's a good answer.
I mean, I'm designer too. That's developer territory. I mean, for me, sounds convincing. I'm just kidding.
I made it all up.
Come
No, it's
on,
true.
Mr.
It's
Joseph.
true. It's true. Check out you could just Google Amazon style dictionary. There's a lot of documentation, and some of it references that translation tool that I'm talking about.
Well, thank you, Mr. Joseph, for all the information. And again, people, if you want to, don't miss any of our events. You can see it on Discover. You can see in our social channels. This is only the second. We will be more events in terms of cast sessions with different topics, different product updates. So don't miss out. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you all.